Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/historyfangirl. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Hi, I'm Stephanie Craig. Welcome to the History Fangirl podcast. This is episode 2, Rila Monastery. It's hard to describe just how much I love Rila Monastery. It's a 10th century Byzantine monastery in the Rila Mountains, which are a few hours outside of Sofia, Bulgaria. So few people outside of Bulgaria think to come here as a travel destination, and even fewer people know about Rila Monastery itself. But for the people of Bulgaria, this building has become a symbol of the nation's resilience. It's beautiful. It's in person, it is simply stunning to see. And its history is tied closely with the history of the Bulgarian people. It has survived the Byzantine Empire, the Ottoman Empire, 3 Bulgarian kingdoms, 2 world wars, and decades of communism. My guest today is Eric Halsey. He is the host of the Bulgarian History Podcast. I started listening to his show in the spring. I fell in love with the intricacies of Bulgarian history. He talks about the Thracians and the Bulgars, the Khans and the Tsars, and really makes Bulgarian history come alive. We talk about Rila Monastery, how it's related to its namesake, Saint Ivan Rilsky, how it survived for a millennium, and how it's tied to Bulgaria's national identity. And then at the end of the episode, find out how to enter this episode's contest. I want to introduce today's guest is Eric Halsey. He is the author and podcaster of the Bulgarian History Project. Hi, Eric. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited. So I'm a huge Bulgarian History Podcast fan. My boyfriend can attest that I have made him listen to your podcast on road trips around Bulgaria more often than he would really like.
Right. Okay. I'm glad my podcast has been co-opted as an instrument of torture.
Yes.
that feels great.
I find it really, so for those who haven't listened to Bulgarian History Podcast, it is similar to, I guess there's a genre of podcast that I would say was probably started by the History of Rome podcast, where it's chronological history that goes very deep into a culture. And I've listened to the History of Rome podcast. I've listened to the Byzantine History podcast. And then I want to say like 2 months ago, I started listening to the Bulgarian History podcast. And I really love, like, as I'm driving from Sofia to like Plovdiv, listening to like the history that was taking place around me. I think it's very exciting. So I'm a huge fan, and everyone should go check it out. How did you get interested in Bulgarian history? Because you are clearly an American like I am.
Yes. a super duper American, like a 14th generation American with no immigrants within the last century anywhere in my family. So yeah, a lot of people assume like you must be ethnically Bulgarian, and I'm like, nope, not even close. The waspiest wasp who ever wasped. But yeah, basically, I always look at this as an example of how incredibly weird and random life is. As you know, I do a little bit of private tutoring and teaching on the side. I work with teenagers, and I like to kind of sometimes frame this story as when you're young, you can have this idea that your life is going to follow a specific path and that it's sort of predestined. Like, no, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And to me, this is always like, you have no idea what's going to happen. So reverse all the way back to high school. I'm 16 years old. And I meet this girl named Sarah Reeves in debate, because I was like a huge debate guy. And she's cute. I like her. I ask her out. We start dating. And she was American, but had just returned to the U.S. after living here in Sofia for 3 years, because her mother was in NATO and they were stationed here.
Oh, wow.
So she wasn't Bulgarian at all, but just happened to have recently been there. And so she told me a lot about the country. She introduced me to some of her Bulgarian friends on AIM chat, for those of you who remember that. And specifically for Christmas that year, she gave me this book by a guy named Stefan Groev called Crown of Thorns, which is a biography of Tsar Boris III. And I was already super into history. I had read all kinds of stuff about European history in the 20th century. And this book, which is mostly from the First World War to the Second World War in Bulgarian history, I mean, just gripped me. It fascinated me because it was covering all this history I was really familiar with, but from a completely different angle. And reading about all the things that were happening and realizing that what I thought I knew of European history just had these massive gaps in it. And so this really started kind of grabbing my attention. And then when I decided to study history, the thought is like, well, you can't study everything. You have to choose what's your specialization. And so I started thinking, well, maybe Bulgarian history could be my specialization. Maybe it's somewhere where I could have an impact. I could say something interesting, make a real contribution. And so when I was in university, I was studying mostly Ottoman, like whatever I could that had to do with Bulgaria. And then I came and studied abroad at the American University in Bulgaria for a year as a chance to live abroad and see, okay, let me actually go live in this country and decide, do I really want to study it? And I loved it and said, totally, I want to keep studying it. And then, I went to Budapest to Central European University and worked with Bulgarian professors there and did a degree in nationalism studies and did my thesis on Bulgarian history. And then I came back here on a Fulbright research grant to build off my master's thesis and prepare for a PhD. And I'm going way all into the story, but basically, the end of it is that at the end of that, I got offered some PhD positions and things, but just decided that, academia was just seems so brutal these days with adjunct professors and lack of health insurance, lack of job security. And I just said, I don't want to be fighting for the rest of my life to try to get tenure, to try to get a stable academic job and blah, blah, blah. And I was already living in Sofia and I had so many cool friends and cool opportunities all around me. It was an easy next step to say, well, why not just stay here in Sofia? And it's been about 4 years since then. And I haven't regretted it for a moment. Sorry, about 3 years.
Wow.
But yeah.
That's awesome. So if you guys don't know, I actually am based out of Sofia right now. It's been I got back. So I spent a month here last year, and then I got back at the beginning of February, and I find it a really just charming place. Unlike you, I literally knew nothing about Bulgaria when I got off the plane. I was on like an around the world trip last year and thought I was going to be on that trip for a really long time. Picked the cheapest Skyscanner ticket from Athens, which is obviously Sofia, but I didn't know it would be because I don't think I really even knew the geography that Bulgaria was north of Greece, and ended up coming back and just loving it. I think it's for anyone who hasn't been to Bulgaria or thought of it before, it's a really special place. So and I do think that all the Americans who are here kind of end up here really randomly. I know some girls who play professional basketball here who never dreamed that this was going to be where they spent their professional basketball career, but they love it too. So.
But yeah, I tend to find that when I've gotten a lot of friends to come visit me here, and I've hosted people on Couchsurfing and Airbnb and things over the years, and I really found that a lot of people like it here in part because they come with zero to like just no expectations.
Yeah, exactly. And then you get here and you're like, oh, it's literally everything. I'm in the Balkans, and I'm in Europe, but I'm in the Ottoman Empire, but I'm also in Eastern Europe behind the Iron Curtain. I can literally study almost anything. I've got Roman ruins in my subway. It's a really crazy place. So today we're going to talk specifically about one of my favorite spots. It's a little bit outside Sofia. I think it's
like 2.5 hours by bus.
I think when we drove, it was 2 hours, and then buses are add a little time for the buses here. That is Rila Monastery, and Rila Monastery is an Orthodox monastery. It is a very old monastery, but the building inside that maybe you've seen a picture of, and is the pictures on the website, the yellow and black and white church that people think of when they think of Rila is actually Neo-Byzantine from, I want to say, the 19th century, but the complex is very old. So why don't you tell us, Eric, a little bit about the founding of the monastery and kind of how it got started? So,
for reference, anyone, to look back, so I know a lot of the basics about the monastery. I've been there maybe 10 times. You're not joking. Like for me, going there over and over again, it just I never regret a moment spent there. It's a really special place. But a lot of what I'm going to talk about, I drew from my notes from episode 17 of the Bulgarian History Podcast. So if you want to jump right in the middle of things and hear some more about this, you can go right to episode 17. But essentially, this monastery is, Yeah, it's the main monastery of Bulgaria. It's considered the kind of most holy, most important monastic site in the whole country. Its patron saint Ivan Rilsky is on the 1 leva coin. And yeah, it's a huge kind of cultural monument for the country. But it is very interesting as to where it comes from, because this monastery has its origins right when Bulgaria is converting to Christianity. So you go all the way back to like the 10th century, right? And this is when Tsar Boris has converted to Christianity, and Ivan Rilsky, the guy who eventually founds the Rila Monastery, he's part of this very first generation of Bulgarians that really grows up in a Bulgaria that's a fully Christian state. Now, of course, before this, a few scattered people would convert to Christianity. You could do that, but when Tsar Boris decides to convert, this is the whole country's properly becoming a Christian state. But the thing about this is that, you can imagine today, you don't just, the Tsar converts to Christianity and says to everyone, cool, we're Christian now, and it's just boom, like that, the whole country is Christian. It's a bit more complicated than that. And so Ivan Rilsky is growing up in this time where, Bulgaria is coming to terms with what does Christianity mean for it. And there's some backlash. I mean, Tsar Boris, shortly afterwards, after he's no longer Tsar, there is a rebellion by one of his brothers who tries to return the state to paganism. He's captured and blinded. It's pretty ugly. So there's definitely some elements within Bulgarian society, particularly in the elite boyars, who are really not happy with Christianity, in part because it's the religion of the Byzantines, who were kind of the great enemy in this period of Bulgarian history, right? So Christianity, it's a tool of this oppressive enemy Byzantine Empire, but it's also now Bulgarian because Bulgaria is developing its own independent church, right? And so, yeah, it's coming in this weird time, this weird in-between time where everyone's figuring out what it means. And one of the ways in which Bulgaria really started to express its own version of Christianity, it was very popular at the time, was Hermetism, right? So right before this, when you had Tsars like Simeon and Boris around this time, Bulgaria is just in war after war after war with the Byzantine Empire. It exhausts the state, right? People die, crops all get used up. Wars just wear a country out. And so a lot of people, they took to a type of Christianity that said you had both Bogomilism and this Hermetism arising at the same time. And both these ideas about Christianity are the world is a deeply flawed place, right? It's a place we shouldn't even really care that much about. We should go into isolation and disconnect from everything and focus on God, right? So the world that Bulgaria was in at this time was just so chaotic and so fraught that these ideas were really, really popular. And Boris was an example of that. So he's born around the modern city of Dupnica, which you'll kind of pass by heading to the monastery today. And he decides, he wants to be a hermit. He goes off to one monastery, doesn't really like it. He tries being a hermit in one area. And eventually he goes and settles in this area in the Rila Mountains, this long kind of winding valley along the Rila River, which leads into the mountains until you get to the Kirill Meadow, where everything just rises up. So he goes into there, and according to legend, we don't really know, but probably he lives in the trunk of a tree for a while and then in this cave. So he goes away because he sees the world as being deeply flawed. He just wants no part of it, right?
Just to ask a question, and this may not be something that you've thought about, but it's something I think about a lot. So I've been to Meteora, and Meteora is significantly more famous, but for those who don't know, or I guess more famous outside of the Balkans, but for those not familiar with Meteora, it's the Greek monasteries that were built on the tops of rocks, so they're practically impenetrable because they're just up in the air, and they're in James Bond movie, and they're some of the rocks near there are in Game of Thrones. They're very beautiful, and they're kind of built around the same time. And when you don't think of Bulgaria and Greece as separate countries, but you think of it as a region, it very much, they seem to come from the same spirit. Do we know anything of, not necessarily that they're connected, but is that the general Orthodox movement at the time?
So it's not really a general Orthodox movement at the time because, Bulgaria is one of the first, maybe even the first, I can't remember precisely, non-Byzantine states to really convert to Orthodoxy, right? So before Bulgaria converts, Orthodoxy is really a Byzantine thing. And there are heresies within Orthodoxy. There's the Paulicians, and there's the people who wanted to, the iconophiles and the iconodules. So there are all these debates and fights within Orthodoxy about how Orthodoxy should feel about the nature of Jesus and about the role of icons in the church and all this stuff. But Orthodoxy is very much tied up in this Byzantine imperial ethos, right? It's an imperial religion. It's centered in the patriarch and in the emperor, right? So when you build these I don't know much about Meteora, but a lot of the times when these monasteries are built, it's to protect against raids and things, right? So in this period, you could still have Bulgars and eventually other people like Cumans and eventually Mongols and things. You'll sweep down in there and do a bit of raiding, and so you want your monastery to be protected. Even if it's deep in the empire, you'll build it in a nice, safe place. But yeah.
No, that's just really interesting. And one of the things that I have thought a lot about is Eric. One of the first episodes of Eric's podcast opens up with, just for listeners who haven't heard, the concept that geography is destiny, and I think of that when I think of Bulgaria, but I very much think of that when I think of Rila. Because you really are just on a plain, and then you're in the mountains, and then you're in a fortress where you can see how they're secluded enough that they survived all of this time. But and that seclusion is also present in a lot of the other churches and monasteries that have survived in the region.
Yeah, because like Rila Monastery it's a bit fortress-like, but you'd really have to want to go there, right? Because essentially Rila Monastery is at a dead-end street. If you keep going past Rila Monastery, the mountains rise up on every end. Granted, it's an amazing place to hike, and actually one of my favorite hikes in Bulgaria is from the Rila Monastery to a village called Govordarci, which is on the other side of the mountains. It's like a 2-day hike. It's amazing. But, it's a pretty serious 2-day hike to keep going. And by car, you have to turn around. There's no way through. And so, yeah, the monastery is definitely built in this secluded place. But the reason for its location is really more about Ivan Rilski not wanting to be near people and kind of going away. Although this gets to another interesting aspect about his story. So he goes into the mountains over here, and he's trying to be this secluded hermit. And yet we get all these stories about him kind of performing miracles for people, and he becomes really famous, which I haven't been able to quite reconcile. Like, why was he simultaneously going to be away from the world and yet somehow interacting with people enough that he performs miracles and becomes famous?
Maybe he was really good at his own PR. Maybe he was a social media maven of the day.
I'm sure he was huge on Instagram.
So we've got Rilski, and so his name is, he also is sometimes called St. John of Rila. Yeah.
Because Ivan is the Slavic version of John. So exactly. John of Rila, Ivan Rilski mean literally the same things, just in Bulgarian and English.
Perfect. In case someone had heard of one version, not the other, they're the same dude. And he is hanging around alone, performing miracles. What do we know about the time period where it went from him in as a hermit to a monastery?
Well, so jumping back to him during his hermit period, like he never really builds anything, but there's an interesting story here that while he's, doing his hermiting, the Tsar at the time, Peter, comes to see him, right? And Peter comes and he's got gold and gifts and things, and he kind of wants Ivan Rilski's blessing. He wants to get his approval and just like meet this famous guy. And Ivan Rilski, according to kind of the stories about it, is like, no, I'm good. No, thanks. You keep all that fancy stuff. I want no part of it. So again, this hermetic ideal that these hermits have no interest in political power. They have no interest in money. So this is kind of showing that Ivan Rilski was very serious about this. But yeah, during his life, he didn't build anything. He just kept living in a cave. But it was really his followers, the people who came after him, who started to build a monastery and build some kind of institution around where he used to be. And there's a nice quote here that I've got in the episode that's allegedly kind of attributed to him. So if you want, I can read this. It's a bit of fun.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So I, John the humble and sinful, who has never done anything good on earth, When I came into this wilderness of Rila, I found no man over here, but only wild animals and impenetrable thickets. I settled alone in it, among wild animals, without food nor shelter. But the sky was my shelter, and the earth my bed, and the herbs my food. But the good Lord, for the love of whom I disregarded everything and endured hunger and thirst, frost and heat of the sun, and corporal nakedness, did not abandon me. But like a merciful and child-loving father, he lavishly satisfied all my needs. What shall I contribute to the Lord for all he has given me? Many are his benefactions to me, for he looked from his holy height at my humbleness, and lent his support to me to go through everything. And I, by the might of Christ, which is in me, because every good gift and every perfect gift is from him. So, seeing you today gathered together in the Lord here, whereas I told you, no man has dwelled until now, but only wild animals, and foreseeing that the end of my life here is soon coming, because of this I made up my mind before my departure from life here to leave you the present fatherly testament of mine, just as carnal fathers leave their children an earthly inheritance of silver and gold and other property, so that you commemorate your father in the Holy Spirit and do not forget his testament. So that's like his final words. You can see that, like, he does stick to his principles about this. Like, he calls himself sinful right at the beginning of that, even though I don't know what sins he's creating, like living in the forest. Is he coveting his neighbor's stuff? Like, no, there are no neighbors, there's no stuff, but he still frames himself that way.
So he passes away. They create this monastery, and it survives a very turbulent, 500 years of Bulgarian Kingdom, Ottoman Empire.
Well, so he died more than 1,000 years ago. So the monastery slowly begins to pick up a little ways after his death. But like the monastery as an institution has existed for a millennia, right? And so, during this time, it's like you've got the First Bulgarian Empire, and these last kind of century and a half, 2 centuries of the First Bulgarian Empire is incredibly chaotic. Just war after war after war, until ultimately the Bulgarian Empire is crushed by the Byzantine Empire. The area is then ruled by the Byzantines for 150 years. Then you've got the Second Bulgarian Empire that pops up. It exists for, off the top of my head, maybe 200 years, a little less than 200, maybe 150. Then it gets crushed by the Ottomans, and you've got 500 years of Ottoman rule. And then you've got independence, and then communism, and then now post-communism. And like, this is the full spectrum that the monastery has lived through, right? So it's lived through wars, it's lived through being ruled by the Byzantines, by the Ottomans, by a Muslim empire, and by the kind of atheistic communist state. Although, for the record, the communist state collaborated a lot with the Bulgarian Orthodox Church. They work together to spy and to kind of keep control of people. So, portrayal of like the Bulgarian communist state as like the great enemy of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church is, I think, a little overstated, though I'm not an expert in that period.
So let's dive in a little bit more to some of those things, because I just feel like until about, 1989, 1990, there was a lot of things that were working against this monastery. So what was the relationship between the Ottoman Empire and the Bulgarian Orthodox Church?
So the Ottoman Empire had what was called the Tanzimat system, where it basically allowed religions to exist within them. Just they were all kind of had to be separated, but religions could pretty much function and run run a lot of their own affairs. But what's the key to remember here is that in Bulgaria, the Ottoman period is portrayed as this time where it was just sort of everyday, constant, brutal oppression for 500 years, and that the Ottoman state was constantly trying to convert all the Christians and destroy the Orthodox Church and things. This is really not true. That there were probably some times when there were forced conversions. There's kind of mixed evidence for that. There were definitely times where there were massacres, right, when the empire was rather brutal and things, as empires will be. But for a lot of the history of the Ottoman Empire, actually, the Ottoman government is doing a bit of the opposite, particularly in the 19th century. When there were kind of Muslims trying hard to convert Christians to become Muslims, the Ottoman Empire is really unhappy with this because it makes people angry, right? It makes the Christians angry, and the Ottoman Empire doesn't want its Christian subjects to be angry. It also upsets the balance of kind of how the empire is run, because Christians had to pay an extra tax, but that's because they didn't serve in the army. Muslims served in the army. Christians paid an extra I don't serve in the army tax. And so if if everyone in the empire suddenly became a Muslim, this is actually a big problem for the Ottoman Empire, because now they have like way too many soldiers for the army and nobody paying enough taxes. And so the empire is actually just trying to like everyone cool your jets. Can we not, rock the boat by getting everyone to convert and stuff? Can everyone just like pay their taxes and serve in the army, and just we can all be friends and run the empire nice and smoothly? For most of its later history, that's what the Ottoman Empire was really all about. So the empire had no interest in kind of, I don't know, crushing the Rila Monastery or stopping the monks from being with their books and things and praying and all this. Like, it was fine. But additionally, they benefited from the fact that, if they had been in the middle of a plain or something, perhaps a marauding, some army of Muslims or something, some Ottoman army heading off to campaign might have plundered them. Just, armies get a little rowdy or something. But again, they were lucky to be way out of anyone's way. Like, there's no reason for an army to pass by where the monastery is. So
unless they had that going. On a hike or something.
Yeah, a very serious hike.
So in the monastery, I don't know the name of the building, but there's a museum there, and they do have some of the guns that were used to guard the monastery, just to make you think, what they were protecting themselves against was a lot of raiders, or the potential, I guess, for raiders. So let's talk about the church in the Bulgarian nation. So Rila really has come to symbolize, in a way, not necessarily the heart of Bulgaria, but it's definitely become one of the national symbols of Bulgaria. And it's connected with how Bulgarians see the church. And just having been here for a few months, this is not a particularly religious country, it doesn't feel. So I'm very just interested in the role of the Orthodox Church in the country.
Yeah, this was something that was really interesting to me as an American coming here for the first time, because I remember very clearly, I was first here in 2009 as a student, and realizing that there were people I met who weren't necessarily, maybe were agnostics or even atheists, but who would still say go to church on Easter and perform the rituals. And as an American, you're like, but why? Is it like, do you do it because your family is someone forcing you to? And they would explain that, no, this is something you do just because you're Bulgarian. And so this is one of these key differences that in the U.S., okay, some people in the U.S. think that being American and being Christian are somehow kind of tied together, but frankly, I'd say those people are wrong. But, that idea is not nearly as strong in the U.S. Whereas in Bulgaria, there's more of an idea that being Bulgarian is in part about being Bulgarian Orthodox. And the reason for that is a lot that, if you look through Bulgarian history, for basically its entire history, Bulgaria is fending off enemies and it is fighting to continue existing. You've heard me mention the podcast that the Bulgarians were one of these steppe tribes from, way out in Central Asia, most likely. And there were a lot of those steppe tribes, right? You had the Huns and the Avars and the Kumans and the Tatars and all these different people groups. And almost none of them ever formed a lasting state. Like the Hungarians did, the Bulgarians did. Like the Tatars have Tatarstan now in Russia, but that's a whole other long story. But generally, almost all these nomadic steppe peoples failed when it came to building a lasting state. And one of the big reasons I would argue for that is that they failed to kind of build an identity and build something that would last, right? So you look at like when the Second Bulgarian Empire came into existence, it didn't have to call itself the Bulgarian Empire. Like, it didn't have to refer back to the First Bulgarian Empire, but it chose to. Why? Because that Bulgarian state had established a connection between a kind of language, an identity, and this Bulgarian Orthodox religion that was semi-autonomous, right, from the main Orthodoxy, the head of the Orthodox Church, the Patriarch in Constantinople. And it also had acquired titles and things, right? The Tsar of Bulgaria. So you could call yourself Tsar of Bulgaria. Whereas if you made up a new state, you couldn't call yourself a Tsar. No other medieval ruler would recognize it because you can't just make up your own title and call yourself that. Someone has to give it to you. And because the Byzantine emperors had given the Bulgarian Khans the title of Tsar, this also gave it some panache, right? Some credibility that was important for a new state to grab a hold of. It was an easy access to credibility on the European and global stage. So the church really, it played a role in this. It played a role in helping to solidify all the peoples living in what was and is Bulgaria, because again, these steppe peoples, usually it's a fairly small population. So if you look like the Avars, who ruled a lot of what's now Romania, a small population of these steppe peoples who ruled over all these other people they conquered. And when people then conquered the Avars, they just vanished, and that was that. And no one ever really talked about them again because there weren't such a big population. Now, there are big debates about how many Proto-Bulgarian tribesmen there were, but in any case, it probably wasn't a massive population, and they were kind of governing over this population that included a lot of Thracians and Slavs and, Wallachians and so on and so forth. And so it was also important for them to develop some identity that would make even the Slavs and the Vlachs and all these other people living in this territory all feel like they're Bulgarians and part of a Bulgarian state. And so they were successful in doing that. And I would argue that the church did play a pretty significant role in that success. And then additionally, during the Ottoman period, a lot of the records about Bulgaria were kept in the monasteries and things. And once again, kind of Bulgarian Orthodox Church was a symbol of the nation and its independence. And when there were no other kind of national symbols in the 19th century to rally around, the church still existed. And so it was something people could refer to and could rally around and could differentiate Bulgaria from other Orthodox peoples, other Christian people within the Ottoman Empire. So it's played a really unique role that, you look at the role of state of Protestantism in the U.S., it's not at all the same.
So, just because I don't really know that much about how the specific Bulgarian Orthodox Church works, is it its own patriarchy?
Yeah. So, you've got all these different Orthodox churches, right? You've got the Romanian Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, the Armenian Orthodox Church, the Georgian Orthodox Church, on and on and on, right? And each one of those is fully independent from one another. I mean, back in the Middle Ages, you would have seen, yes, the Bulgarian Orthodox Church was independent from the Patriarch in Constantinople, but people still saw the Patriarch in Constantinople as like the main person of Orthodoxy because, Byzantine Empire, much more famous and everything. But yeah, like the idea about Orthodoxy is that these are all independent national churches, and they all can have their slight quirks and differences in ritual and things. And so this is, obviously a big departure from, say, Catholicism, where, okay, you do have differences within Catholicism, and different countries will emphasize different aspects. But still, it's a much, much more unitary kind of church, and with its center in Rome, whereas in Orthodoxy, your center is the capital of whatever national Orthodox church you're talking about.
So does that mean that they did or did not participate in some of the controversies that maybe the Byzantine Church had, like iconoclasm?
They didn't really. I mean, the closest thing that the Bulgarian Orthodox Church generally had was its fight with the Bogomils, which I kind of alluded to earlier. And this is a movement that arose around the same time as Ivan Rilsky. It was a movement of people who basically said that you shouldn't fight in wars, you shouldn't pay taxes, you should have no connection whatsoever to sort of society and all this stuff. You should just go live on your own or live in communities and just sort of focus your entire life on God in whatever community, wherever you are. So the Bogomilism came out of this same idea that Bulgaria was going through all these wars and it was exhausting the nation and everything, and Christianity was coming in. And so some Bulgarians sort of took this Christianity that was coming and modified it to suit their own political aims, which were anti the central government, anti the army and the taxes and all this stuff. And they used Christianity as a tool to sort of disassociate themselves from all these things. And as a result, of course, then Bogomilism became Bogomils became enemies of the state, because if you're the Bulgarian state, you are not happy about a chunk of your population deciding it's not going to fight in armies and not going to pay taxes. Like, that's a problem. The Quakers in the U.S. can do that because the U.S. is much bigger and the Quakers are a much smaller group. But this is the Middle Ages. It's a much more warlike time, and the Bogomils were quite prominent. And so this movement, the Bogomils, they actually eventually spread all the way into Western Europe. And I don't remember exactly when, but in the, I don't know, maybe like 16th century or so, 17th century, I'd have to look it up. The French kings are fighting wars against the Bogomils to like wipe them out in France. And so they as a force last for several centuries and spread all over Europe. And just like with the Bulgarian state, pretty much every central government in Europe sees these people as like the worst and they need to be all killed or converted. Like everyone sees Bogomilism as like really not acceptable.
They come from Bulgaria, or was Bulgaria also dealing with them contemporaneously with other, like, is that a Bulgarian phenomenon?
Yeah, it was developed here. Yeah, I mean, that's why Bogomils, or Bog is the Bulgarian word for God, and Bogomil means one who loves God. Like it can be a name today. You could meet a Bulgarian named Bogomil. So yeah, it began here, but like eventually it was kind of more or less, probably not completely crushed, but like the Bogomils who remained were so small and in isolated communities that no one cared about them anymore. But yeah, they were kind of really pushed down, though it took a century or two in Bulgaria. And as I said, they kind of gradually spread throughout Europe, and the centuries went on as they were spread and were kind of, you think of them maybe a little bit like the Mormons, that, Mormonism spread and the Mormons themselves migrated to flee persecution and things. Maybe there's some similarities, though it's not exactly the same.
Interesting.
But yeah, like a religious sect that is very not welcome by everyone.
And exported to, Bulgaria is exporting its problems to other parts of Europe. That's so interesting. So let's talk about specifically traveling to the site. When you're there, there is a larger building that you kind of walk into with a courtyard, and there are rooms. There's this beautiful, like I said, 19th century Neo-Byzantine church. Do you want to tell us anything about the specifics of the site?
Yeah, so when you go there, you've got, as you said, the main complex is from the 19th century in this Neo-Byzantine style, which you can also find in places like Alexander Nevsky Church in Sofia and like the Sofia City Museum, which used to be the bathhouse. It's style I really like. Very ornamental.
Probably one of my favorite things about the city, specifically, are those buildings.
Yeah. So when you get there, yeah, you've got kind of these outer walls that are a bit fortress-like. I mean, it really looks like a little fortress nestled in the mountains. And then you enter and it just sort of opens up, and you have these, I guess you could call them arcades, usually like, column after column after column with arches in between them going all around you. And up there, those are the monks' cells. And that's an important thing. It's still an active monastery. Monks still live there, and it's functioning as a monastery. Also, a lot of people don't know this, but you can actually stay there. I don't know what it costs, but like if you do want to pay, you can stay there for a small fee. Though it's interesting, it's a little bit different. Like I've stayed at monasteries in Romania, and there it's actually free. Like they will house and feed you as a traveler. This is when I was sort of broke hitchhiking and busking across Romania many years ago. And a guy I was staying with in Târgu Mureș said, you should, the next stop you can stop at the monastery, they'll feed you.
What monastery was it?
Oh, I can't remember the name. I'd have to look it up. I mean, this was maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
All right, let's talk later, because I would like to stay for free in a Romanian monastery.
Yeah, I'd really have to Google it. But it was kind of up in the Carpathians. It was very beautiful, very secluded. That was a bit interesting because a succession of guys who had been in prison for a long time and had gotten out of prison and decided that they would become super duper religious, sort of all cornered me and talked to me about Romanian Orthodoxy for several hours. And they were a little bit intimidating. It was kind of like, I used to do drugs and I was with women and I was partying and I sinned and I did all this stuff and I went to prison and now I'm out. And it's like, whoa, okay, wow, that's okay.
Every single thing about Romanian religion felt more intense when I was there. And I went to a monastery called Horzu, and my driver cried because it was St. George's Day, and his dad and mom were named after St. George. Like, just everything was very religious, but actually spiritual. Yeah. Whereas in Bulgaria, it's nationalistic, exactly the way that you. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all that you had a crazy conversion experience.
Yeah, in Romania, you'll see more people crossing themselves when they go by churches. I've never seen a Bulgarian do that, although Bulgarians will cross themselves when they exit a church. So you can look out for that. They'll sort of turn around and they'll step backwards out of the church. They'll walk backwards while crossing themselves.
My driver did it as we drove past churches, and since I spent a day with the same driver just going to churches, that was we did it a lot. Yeah.
But getting back to the monastery, right? Yeah. So you get inside and you've got the central church also from the 19th century. I think one of the really cool things there are it has these outrageous, super cool, interesting, quirky frescoes all around the outside showing, visions of hell. They've got stories from the Bible. There's a particularly good one of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's super fun. If you're like me and you're a huge fan of classical art memes, you'll have a load of fun just imagining what they're saying to each other. Sort of putting little mind captions in there. But it's really interesting. And, I'm not that good with the stories of the Bible and things, but I imagine if you have a guide or something to have you explain to you what stories they're showing and things, it's very, very interesting.
The first time I went was on an organized tour with a guide, and we spent quite a bit of time. And he pointed out, especially the ones that are on the outside. So, so the big church in the middle has alcoves, and it's obviously rude for your guide to talk really long inside the church, but in the alcoves he spent a long time just pointing out the different stories in there. And I've been to a lot of Orthodox churches, and there's a lot of colors are the same and a lot of themes are the same and the styles can look the same, but Rila is definitely got more of a fear of hell thing going on than I would say most of them. And so the reason the church was built in the 19th century was that there was a fire, not because they decided to add or make significant changes, but a fire burned down a large portion of the monastery, and so they rebuilt that. But it is, I don't know what it looked like before, but even though it is a newer building than the rest of the structure, it is one of my favorite places.
Yeah, and the oldest part is this tower in the middle, the Tower of Hrelia, which is from the 14th century. And there you can pay, I think it's 5 or 6 leva to go up in the tower, and I've done it once. It's pretty cool. You get a kind of a view up the top from those little tiny windows. But it's worth a couple leva to go up in the tower. The trick is that you have to find the person who can sell you the ticket. That can be difficult. You got to really find out, okay, where's the person? So,
yeah. And if you're on a tour, you're probably not going to have time to do that. But one day I went on a tour, and then I went on another day by myself with my boyfriend. But that day was very cold, and so neither time did I spend enough time just walking around the area, so I'm going to have to go back. But if you're on an organized tour, you'll get more information, but you'll get less time to appreciate the place. And the place is huge, and it has a museum, and there are parts that I still haven't seen after 2 visits. Yeah,
and it's another thing I'll say that it's also it's a nice thing to go see any time of year. Like I've been there in the middle of the winter when there's snow on the ground and it's freezing, and I've been there in the heat of the summer and everywhere in between. And all the seasons bring different feels to it, and no matter what season it is, it's just always usually a pretty peaceful place. Even when it's kind of full of tourists, it seems very peaceful and just a nice place to just look at nature and look at the architecture. But yeah, so you mentioned there's the museum there. You can see this carved cross, which has these teeny tiny figures that are the size of grains of rice carved into it. That's quite something to see. And then if you go through the monastery, there are a couple restaurants there. They're all a little bit expensive, but that's your only choice, particularly if you're there on a tour or something. Generally, I'd say if you're in that part of the Rila Mountains, to try the trout. I really like the trout there. It's usually served whole, so you kind of pick out the bones and everything. But it's delicious, served very simply, just with a wedge of lemon you squeeze over it. Yeah, it's kind of the special river trout from that region.
Yeah, if you're there by yourself, the tours and you're leaving Rila, like you said, Eric said, when you go there, it's in basically a cul-de-sac in the mountains with the river on the side of it. So when you turn around to leave, it is. I was there in November and March, so I think I should go back in July as soon as then. But there's a restaurant as you leave. There's a restaurant maybe 5 minutes, and it's on the left side, and all the tour groups stopped there, and we weren't planning on stopping there, but we were so hungry that we stopped there again. So I could recommend it as just decently, it's tasty, but it's a little expensive, but there's not a lot of choices in the area if you're looking to make a day of it. And this is one of those places that more people should know about, whether you're planning on going to Bulgaria ever or not. But if you do happen to go there, it's a really enjoyable day, and it's one of the only things that got me out of Sofia the first time I was here, because I was having so much fun I didn't want to leave the city.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of those restaurants, you'll notice, the one that has kind of tables right down along the river. I remember I spent my birthday there with my family. A couple years ago, My family was all coming to visit Bulgaria for the first time. And I was taking them to see the Rila Monastery on my, would have been, I guess, my 25th birthday. And when we stopped and had lunch there, I've got some nice pictures of it and everything. It's a good memory. But yeah, lovely place to sit in nature along the river and enjoy some trout, have a beer.
And you were recently there for a special event. What was the event that you were there for?
It wasn't a special. So I've got one American friend who's here with Fulbright, and she was coming up to Sofia to show a friend of hers and some of her friends, but like some Americans who are friends of a friend of mine, blah, 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 were visiting. And my friend asked me, hey, do you want to be like a tour guide and kind of show us around Sofia? And I love doing that. So I said, of course. And I was going to have a day off that week anyways. And so on Monday, we're going to rent a car and drive to the Rila Monastery. And so I said, okay, I'll make Monday the day off and go with you guys. So it wasn't for any particular special event or something. Just, again, any excuse to go is one I'll gladly take.
I agree. So we're wrapping up here, but what is your favorite spot in Rila Monastery?
I think honestly, I think maybe if you walk, as you go in, if you go around to the right of the church, I think there's some benches back there. And that little corner with there's a big pine tree there. It's usually a bit more peaceful. Like most of the tourists don't kind of walk around that area as much. But besides that, I also quite like inside the main church, the place where the heart of Tsar Boris III is buried. I mentioned the book that's a biography of his that it got me originally interested in Bulgarian history. And even though I'm, very much generally kind of an anti-monarchist, I really respect him as a human being. And I think he's really a tragic figure. And so, being in the presence of his heart and things and thinking about the sacrifices he made for his country and to try to kind of do the best he could and all that he gave up and how he died young, possibly poisoned by Hitler, possibly just from a heart condition exasperated by the immense stress of trying to rule the country through a lot of chaotic years. It's also kind of a very special place.
There's another, and Rila's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. There's another church that's a UNESCO World Heritage Site that's actually in Sofia. It's in Bojana, and it's called Bojana Church. And Queen Eleonora is buried there. How are they related?
So Eleonora, if I remember right, is his mother.
Okay, so that's very interesting. They ended up buried at a pair of UNESCO World Heritage Site churches.
Yeah, the Bojana Church is also a really amazing place to go see. Yeah, it's got the Tsaritsa's grave, or Tsarina. Sorry, Tsaritsa is like for the princess, Tsarina is queen. So it's got her grave, but also the frescoes in there are really amazing. Like if you are at all interested in art history, those frescoes, they do predate the Renaissance, but they have a lot of kind of vanishing point and a lot of these three-dimensional painting techniques that were developed during the Renaissance. And so it's a really kind of amazing place to go check out. So I'd also recommend that. In addition to the fact that, just a funny anecdote, there's a California redwood right next to the Bojana Church. It's the gift to Tsar Ferdinand.
Okay, because I left, so I've been there twice. I've been to Bojana Church twice too. And I have a post on my website about it, and I have about the church, not just the tree. But I tried to figure out why there were these freaking California redwood trees in the middle of Bulgaria, and I could not find it. So I am so glad that you brought that up because it's driven me crazy.
Just that it was a gift to Tsar Ferdinand. But I find it funny. Like being a terrible American, I've never been to the West Coast, and so I laugh that those are the only California redwoods I've ever seen. Are the ones in the suburbs of Sofia.
I haven't seen any. And maybe when I was 2 and a baby there, but I don't think we did that part of California. And I just feel like maybe they have sister trees out there, and it makes me think of America.
Yeah, who knows?
So, is there any part of Rila Monastery or Bulgarian Orthodox Church history that you think we missed that we should cover?
No, I think that's pretty much all the major things. But definitely if you're going, if you can get yourself a tour guide, or if not, just go online and read up about it. Download episode 17 of the podcast and give that a listen. It'll give you a lot of background for that time, and go kind of immerse yourself in it because it's as a functioning monastery, it really just, it has such a special feel to it. And there are few places. I've been to 42 countries, and there's not that many places I've been that feel like that place does.
Well, thank you so much. And so guys, go to historyfangirl.com. Today's episode is go to the post for today's episode, and you'll get links to all of this great stuff. Even if you're not planning on ever going to Bulgaria, check out the photos of Rila because they're awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. But yeah, you should really come here. We're here, and you should come hang out with us.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Thanks so everyone.
Much. Bye, guys. I want to pause for a moment and talk about our sponsor, Audible.com. Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. I've been a subscriber to Audible.com over the years, for probably since they started advertising on podcasts, and I absolutely love being able to go in and download long-form Audible books whenever I'm going to be on a long road trip or a long plane or just need to be able to dive into something. I'd like to recommend, to go with this episode, the book Stork Mountain by Miroslav Pankov. It is just a lovely novel. Stork Mountain is about a young Bulgarian immigrant who returns from America to Bulgaria to search for his grandfather. There's magic and the history of the Bulgarians and the Turks and the Greeks. There's lots of Orthodox saints and ghosts, and it's a really lovely novel, and I highly recommend it. And you can download that for free at audibletrial.com/historyfangirl. I want to say thank you again to Eric Halsey for coming on the show. If you want to check out the Bulgarian History Podcast, go to historyfangirl.com. The article for this episode will have a link to his show that you can check out. I also want to say thank you to those who have subscribed already. It is really important to the show if you would subscribe in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And then also if you would go into iTunes and rate and review. It's up to you if you want to give us 1 or 5 stars, but those ratings really matter and the reviews matter too. So if you would take a moment and do that, I would be forever grateful. The next episode of the show, we are going to jump to North America. We're going to head to Atlanta and check out the Margaret Mitchell House. I interviewed Jessica Van Landite. She is the Deputy Mission Officer for the Atlanta History Center. And we talked about Margaret Mitchell, the author of Gone with the Wind. So if you like stories of unlikely best-selling authors and their tiny apartments and all of the weird Atlanta history that went into the making of that novel, then definitely check out the next episode. And finally, the contest for this episode. So I interviewed Mike Duncan, who is the History of Rome podcast author for episode 1. And I am giving away 3 copies of his book, The Storm Before the Storm. 1 copy for each of the first 3 episodes of this podcast. And if you want to enter to get your own copy, head over to the History Fangirl podcast, find the article for this episode, the Rila Monastery episode, and instructions on how to enter will be there. Good luck.